Hi, and welcome back to Focal Point AFR Talk. Brian Fisher is my name. You are listening to Focal Point on AFR Talk, American Family Radio Talk Network, the most dangerous and feared radio network in America. Honored and pleased to welcome to our decision maker line Jan Morgan of Jan Morgan Media. Been a guest on this program before. Jan's kind enough to publish some of what I write on her website, and we want to bring her in to talk about this IRS business. Jan, welcome back to Focal Point with Brian Fisher.
Thanks, Brian. Glad to be here with you today.
Hey, by the way, Jan, I noticed you had on your website you were packing that AR-15. I want to tell you, my wife went out, and we went out shooting with some friends, shot AR-15, shot AK-47s, and my wife, little 5-foot wife, was so proud of what she did using that AR-15 with the laser sight. She's actually got the target tacked up on the wall of our bedroom. She was that excited. So
that's my kind of lady. Well, you know what people have the misconception that the AR-15 is a difficult firearm to shoot because it looks so bad, but it's actually for a woman a very easy firearm to shoot because there's no recoil. And it's amazingly accurate.
Well, you know, and she shot that AK-47 twice, and that thing had so much kick in it that she said, that's enough, 2 and out. But you know, the AR-15, she could fire that thing at will. Well, listen, Jan, you've got a documentary up on your website. I want you to tell us just a little bit about that documentary. I watched a good bit of it last night. Tell people where they can find it and kind of what it's about. And then I want us to talk about a couple of specific examples of the IRS abuse of power that you cover in that documentary.
Okay. The documentary is called Rampant Injustice. You can find it on YouTube, Rampant Injustice. There are a number of videos called Rampant Injustice, but it's the only one that has over 300,000 hits on it. We decided, and I say we, me, backed financially by a number of citizens, decided to go after the IRS and the Justice Department because there were continuous complaints from conservative business owners that they were being targeted, and not only targeted by the IRS, but they were being strong-armed in such a way that we have not seen reported yet by the mainstream media. When I say targeted, I mean like the IRS agents being flown in from all over the country, come barging into their businesses with guns drawn over simple white-collar related allegations made against these people. These were nonviolent people who never had any kind of criminal history at all. So when I'm talking about some scary tactics being used here, we're talking about paramilitary Gestapo-style tactics used by the IRS agents and Justice Department. And that has not been covered by the media. I keep waiting for mainstream media to get hold of this documentary and expose it while we're on top of all the rest of the IRS scandals.
Well, you know, and one of I was really struck by just the opening segment of that documentary, Jan, about this IRS. I mean, like a SWAT raid, a SWAT team coming into, I think it was a bottled water company or something like that.
Yes.
Just kind of tease us about what's in that segment.
You know, Brian, we were so careful because as a journalist, credibility is everything. You know that. And I've worked 23 years to establish a strong, solid, credible, professional history. And the last thing I'm going to do is put anything out there that I can't substantiate. I interviewed probably 50 to 60 different people about exactly what went down and how it went down. And I interviewed them separately from not only that water bottling company, but other businesses who went through, they say, similar raids. And they all told the same story. And I just don't believe that many different people in that many different cities would lie about something like that. People who had nothing to gain by talking to me about what happened. And yes, they were SWAT team style raids, and it is frightening the way those agents came in. And, you know, Brian, you think, okay, well, if it just happened in one state, maybe you just had a few rogue agents playing cowboy. And you know how that goes. There are bad guys in every law enforcement agency. But there was a pattern. What we established in this documentary was a pattern of this type of raid occurring in states around this country owned by conservative businesses like Gibson Guitar. We interviewed them in this documentary. They were treated the same way, paramilitary-style raids with agents walking in with loaded guns pointed at innocent citizens who weren't accused of any type of violent behavior. You know, you can understand if a law enforcement agency comes barreling into a place with guns drawn, if someone's accused of some sort of violent, if they're expecting a violent reaction, if there's a violent history with the people involved. But most of these people in these businesses didn't have anything to do with the financial transactions of the business owner, yet they were treated like this. And we established that clearly and concisely throughout that documentary.
You know, when that happened at Gibson Guitars, it was back in 2011. I'm looking at a story here on Breitbart.com. We had the CEO, Henry Jeskowitz, came on this program in the wake of that to talk about what had happened. You know, he's a conservative guy.
Sure.
And on August 24, 2011, the Department of Justice, so we've got the IRS going after these bottled water people. Then you got the Department of Justice sending armed agents into the Gibson Guitar Factory in Memphis, confiscating $500,000 worth of guitar-making material as an alleged violation of environmental standards. And they seem to be targeted partly because of their political ideology, and the tool that they could use was this kind of fascist element of the environmental movement.
You know, Brian, the sad thing is I talked to Henry Jeskowitz. I interviewed him in this documentary, and he said it cost his company $5 million to simply lawyer up and prepare to fight the IRS and the Justice Department when, in actuality, they were never charged with anything. And it was the Justice Department and the IRS that went after this water bottling company, as well as these other businesses that I talk about. It was both agencies combined. So there is a pattern here, and apparently it is a policy of both of those agencies to use these type of intimidation tactics. And they have to stop, Brian. They have to stop. And if you'll notice, too, in the documentary, we point out where the IRS went in and took money from these business owners' accounts. And we're not talking about people who've been convicted or found guilty of anything. We're not talking about freezing money. We're talking about actually removing hundreds of thousands of dollars from business owners' accounts without giving them any warning. They couldn't even make their payroll for their employees who, live from paycheck to paycheck. Minimum wage employees who depend on those checks suddenly because of some alleged misbehavior by the owner of a business, all these employees don't get their paychecks. And all of these businesses, for example, the water bottling company owner, John Stacks, it's been almost, 2 years since he was raided. He's still, there are no indictments, nothing. The man lost 86 boxes of materials and computers and things taken by the IRS from his company that has not been replaced. He says it's like starting a business over. How do you run a business with no records? That's happened time after time after time.
And I'm thinking about this Frank Vandersloot case. He was the co-chairman of Mitt Romney's presidential campaign. He's a Republican. He's a very conservative guy from my home state of Idaho.
Yes.
I was familiar with him from there. Very successful businessman. Anybody's using any Melaleuca products, that's Frank Vandersloot. Anyway, he's been active in conservative causes in Idaho for years. He's a solid citizen. His values line up with ours. He's a practicing Mormon, and he has the values, the social values that you'd expect to find there, and he's unapologetic about them, and he uses the resources in order to advance conservative causes. And I think Wayne Root was making the point when the IRS went after him. I mean, as soon as it goes up on the Obama website that he's the co-chairman and a big donor, 2 weeks later he gets an audit from the IRS. 2 weeks after that, his workplace gets an audit from the Department of Labor, and then I think there was a third audit after that. And all of that happened in the space of a month or 6 weeks after the Obama administration makes it clear that he's kind of a public target. And he had to spend $80,000 in lawyer's fees to kind of extricate himself from all that. And Wayne Root's point is, look, I don't have $80,000 to hire a lawyer to come in and fight these battles for me. So you talk about this huge, huge intimidation factor for ordinary citizens that just want to become involved in the political process.
Exactly. And Henry Jeskowitz of Gibson Guitar told me that there were other guitar companies that were owned and run by liberals who were doing the same thing that he was accused of doing, which he was told was wrong, and yet he said they were not targeted. And he said, the government knows that we're all using this same kind of wood. And he said, but we were the only ones targeted. So, yes, and it will break. Like I say, it cost Gibson Guitar $5 million. And in lost services, I mean, they shut down their company, shut them down for hours and hours. They shut down the assembly line at the water bottling company. So it is very frightening that the government has that kind of power. And, when someone first told me about this happening, I sat on this story for a couple of months because everyone who knows me said, you better leave that alone because as soon as you touch it, your name's going to be out there and they're going to come after you. And I did sit on it for a couple of months, and then the more I thought about it, and the more I talked to different people who had been targeted, the more I could not leave it alone.
Well, Jan, I walked through with our listening audience in the last segment a column by James Taranto at the Wall Street Journal, basically saying, look, these scandals, this abuse of power on the part of the Obama administration is a real crisis of authority, and it's a crisis for our democracy. And he says, he used the word convulsive. He says, this has got to be resolved, this kind of abuse of power. We've still got 3.5+ years left of this kind of dictatorial, tyrannical abuse of government power. And he says, look, this has got to be resolved in one way or another, and it's going to be convulsive. That was his word. He's not given to hyperbole. It's going to be, there's going to be a lot of dislocation and unrest if the American people will stand up to this kind of tyranny.
And we're going to have to, Brian. The sad thing is we have a system of checks and balances in place. Our founding fathers separated our branches of government, and they're supposed to keep each other in check. But you look at the situation like with James Rosen at Fox News. It turns out that the U.S. magistrate who approved the subpoena, which should never have been granted, had actually been previously talked not so positively about on Fox News before all that happened. And so that magistrate approved that unconstitutional subpoena.
Well, and that's why I've taken to calling it the Internal Retaliation Service, because that's how this administration is using it. Well, our guest has been Jan Morgan Media, and janmorganmedia.com. That's the website.
Thank you, Brian.
All right. Thank you very much, Jan. Always a pleasure to have you on. Jan Morgan Media. You can go to her website at janmorganmedia.com. Encourage you to view that documentary, Rampant Injustice. You can pick that up on YouTube. And the number to call, by the way, we got just one segment for phone calls today, so we'll pack as many as we can in. 888-589-8840. 888-589-8840. Give us a call. Join the conversation. Be right back.